So in securing a web API application, you're going to want to think about what in fact needs to be secured. And the amount of effort involved really has a lot to do with how sensitive the data is. The value of sensitive data in your system is directly related to what kind of data it is. You may have statutory limitations, so if you're doing something like a medical system, you can be liable for large fines if there's a data intrusion. You might have financial data like credit card numbers, so if you're running something like an e-commerce site or a clearinghouse, you're going to need to make sure that that data is very protected. Or even something as simple as writing an order entry system for a pizza shop. You might not think that that needs to be very protected, but you still need to make sure that the sensitivity of the data that's being transmitted is safe, especially when there's financial instruments like credit cards being processed over the wire. So this comes down to a question about what needs to actually be secured. This is a small discussion we had in my Designing a Web API course here at Pluralsight, but I'll bring it into this discussion as well. If you're writing an API that's using private or personalized data, you need to secure it. If you're sending any sensitive data across the wire, like credentials, address, phone number, social security number, credit cards especially, you need to secure it. If you're handling credentials over the wire in any way, you have to secure it. And if you're trying to protect your servers from overuse, from denial of service attacks and just intrusions, you're going to need to deal with security as well. And not all of these can be handled at the API level. Doing some basic threat modeling to understand where the vectors of security problems can happen is important when you're trying to secure your web API application. So of course we know we have users that are going to use your API through an internet connection ordinarily. This may be an intranet connection in some cases, but the same problems exist in both cases. And of course you have your servers that are normally protected with physical network devices like firewalls. Threats can come across this spectrum of operation. You can have eavesdroppers that are listening to the traffic as it goes along, looking for sensitive information. You can have hackers that are trying to do forced intrusions through those devices like firewalls, but you also have personnel that could be doing the various things with that data. And you have users and hackers that are trying to get at the data, find holes in the JavaScript code for a website, or that are trying to intrude across the internet. So you have to understand that problems can come from all these different places, and there's different ways to attack each of these security concerns. It's outside of the scope of this course trying to handle everything like location security, understanding intrusion detection. We can't really handle that, but the API, once we understand where we can protect a lot of this data, we can do some things in Web API to support that. So at the end of the day, you need to protect your API. Securing your server infrastructure is outside the scope here. We're going to assume that you have armed guards and key codes and everything they have in the movies to protect your servers from people actually getting to the physical boxes. You will have to worry about secure in transit. And so as you communicate information from the client to your servers, of stopping those men in the middle from looking and sniffing at those packets. This is typically done with SSL, and SSL is almost always the right thing to do. The weight of processing SSL on the client and the server is small compared to the level of security you get in that transmission. And the cost of actually implementing SSL, the processing involved in encrypting and decrypting information on both sides, is usually worth the expense. You may find some situations where the CPU cost is prohibitively high for doing this, but in today's day that just doesn't happen very often. You also need to worry about securing the API itself. So securing it from other websites trying to use the API, so whether to enable or disable cross-origin security. And then typical authorization and authentication, which we'll talk about at length.